Welcome back to The Explainer, everyone. I am absolutely thrilled you're joining us today because honestly, we're unpacking something genuinely fascinating. We're going to dive deep into the profound philosophical context and the incredibly strict translation guidelines behind the text Bhagavad-gītā As It Is. If you've ever found yourself wondering how these ancient sacred texts actually bridge the gap between their original context and us modern readers, well, you're going to love this. We're looking right at the source material's opening pages to figure out exactly how the author sets the stage, establishes authority, and preps the reader for the massive journey ahead. So, let's jump right in.
Okay, let's dive into this incredibly powerful quote. This right here is exactly how the source material immediately establishes a really distinct atmospheric mood. It doesn't kick off with some big boast about academic prowess, right? Instead, it starts with this profound statement of pure humility. Just look at that contrast, being born in the darkest ignorance versus having your eyes opened by a torch of knowledge. The text is essentially insisting that before we even think about analyzing these ancient verses, we've got to acknowledge our own limitations. We're in the dark, and we desperately need someone to hand us a flashlight, or in this case, a torch. And that light, according to the text, doesn't just magically appear from reading a book. It comes specifically from a spiritual master. It totally sets a deeply reverent tone for everything that follows.
And you know, that reverence naturally leads us straight to a key concept found right in the opening prayers. The Vaishnavas. These are the devotees of the Lord. And what I find literally so captivating about the source text description here is the incredibly vivid imagery it uses. It doesn't just call them teachers or guides. No, it calls them compassion-filled desire trees who can fulfill everyone's desires. It's like, in this tradition, there's this deeply structured reverence for these spiritual figures. The text impartially frames them as absolutely essential guides for fallen souls. Without their compassion, getting access to that spiritual knowledge we were just talking about, that torch of knowledge, is considered practically impossible.
Now, this reverence doesn't just float around randomly. It actually builds into a very specific, rigid structure. The text doesn't just throw out a general thank you to the universe. Instead, it establishes a precise, hierarchical chain of respect. This is known as offering obeisances, and it meticulously works its way up the ladder. It starts with the immediate spiritual master, then moves to revered historical figures like Srila Rupa Goswami and his brothers. From there, it ascends up to Lord Chaitanya and his associates, before finally reaching the ultimate divine figures, Srimati Radharani and Śrī Kṛṣṇa, along with their close associates. Think of it like tracing the lineage of a sacred inheritance, basically proving that the knowledge being passed down is plugged directly into the divine source.
So after setting up all these beautiful, poetic prayers and this intense chain of reverence, the text suddenly transitions into a very practical, real-world conflict. We can basically call this the translation problem. Now, the Bhagavad-gītā, which is also known as the Gita-upanishad, is framed here as the absolute essence of Vedic knowledge. Super important stuff, right? But that brings up a totally natural question, one the author actually anticipates. Since there are literally dozens, if not hundreds, of English commentaries already out there, why do we need a brand new translation? Like, what exactly is missing from the ones we already have sitting on our bookshelves?
So, the crucial point is the striking difference in approaches here. The author actually mentions that a lady recently asked him to recommend an English translation, and it made him realize there was a massive issue. On one side, you have existing translations, both from America and India, that the text heavily criticizes. Why? Because the commentators inject their own personal opinions and whims into the text. But on the flip side, the entire goal of this specific translation is preserving the completely untouched spirit of the Bhagavad-gītā. The author's argument is basically this. You cannot truly understand the text if the translator has twisted the words to fit their own personal philosophy. You need it exactly as it is.
To really drive this point home, the author uses a highly accessible, everyday analogy. We're shifting from high-level philosophy to something super practical that we all deal with. If you've ever sat there wondering why the author is just so relentlessly strict about removing all personal interpretation, acting almost as if changing a single word might cause a total disaster, well, this next analogy clears it up instantly.
And this brilliantly illustrates the author's logic. Think about taking medicine. Step 1, you're sick. You have an ailment. Step 2, you strictly follow the directions on the label or whatever your doctor told you. You definitely don't just take a random dose based on your own whim, and you for sure don't take it just because your buddy thought it was a good idea, right? The author argues that the Bhagavad-gītā is this exact same type of medicine. If you actually want it to cure your material ailment, you simply cannot accept it according to the whimsical interpretations of commentators. It's got to be taken exactly as directed by the person who spoke it. No exceptions.
Which naturally shifts our focus to a pretty monumental question. If we absolutely have to follow the directions of the speaker, who exactly is the speaker? Like, who wrote the label on this spiritual medicine bottle? The text is completely unequivocal here about identifying the ultimate authority dictating how this knowledge has to be received. To actually understand the text as it is, we first have to understand exactly who the source text claims is doing all the speaking.
The speaker, the text tells us flat out, is Lord Śrī Kṛṣṇa. And he is referred to throughout the text by a very specific, powerful title, Bhagavan. Now, the author clarifies something important here. Sometimes the word Bhagavan is used in a generic way to refer to any powerful person or demigod. But, and this is a massive distinction, the source material explicitly establishes that in the context of the Bhagavad-gītā, Bhagavan designates Lord Śrī Kṛṣṇa and exclusively Krishna as the supreme personality of Godhead. So it's not just a polite title of respect. It is a hard-line assertion of absolute, supreme authority on every single page of the book.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how the author doesn't just expect you to take his word for it. Instead, he builds this massive historical consensus to back up Krishna's supreme position. You've got these incredibly great acharyas from throughout Indian history, figures like Shankaracharya and Ramanujacharya, all confirming this exact status. Plus, it aligns perfectly with authoritative texts. We're talking the Brahma Samhita, the Puranas, specifically the Srimad Bhagavatam, and of course, the Bhagavad-gītā itself. The text is impartially reporting that a vast, ancient tradition all agrees on one thing: Krishna is the ultimate authority.
Before we wrap things up today, I want to briefly jump back to the very beginning of the source text, right back to those opening prayers. Because amidst all this intense, strict logic about translation and supreme authority, the text is also just deeply poetic and atmospheric. It gives us these beautifully vivid descriptions of the divine figures. Krishna isn't just painted as some abstract, distant supreme being. He's described really intimately as the friend of the distressed, the source of creation, and the master of the gopis. And Srimati Radharani? She's described as having a bodily complexion like molten gold. She is the queen of Vrindavana, the daughter of King Vrishabhanu, and incredibly dear to Lord Kṛṣṇa. This vivid imagery really anchors all that heavy philosophical weight in deeply personal devotion.
And, all of these introductory obeisances, all of this super careful setting of the stage, the profound humility, the strict chain of reverence, the vivid imagery, it all culminates in this incredibly famous mantra. The text basically seals this reverential atmosphere with the chanting of these names right before the heavy analytical translation work of the book actually kicks off. It's designed to ensure that the reader enters the text not as some conqueror trying to hack a puzzle, but as a respectful student approaching the ultimate authority.
Which leads us to a pretty profound place to wrap up today's explainer. We've seen how meticulously the author argues against injecting our own personal opinions, insisting instead on strict, medicine-like adherence to the speaker's original directions. So I'm going to leave you with this final thought to chew on. In a world absolutely full of endless, varying interpretations, is the truest, most authentic way to understand a complex ancient text to simply take it as it is. It really is a fascinating question about the delicate balance between our own personal interpretation and following authoritative direction. Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive. Keep asking questions, keep learning, and I will catch you in the next explainer.